what is the sit rep on the U.S. trade war bravely and heroically launched by the Great White Hope Donald Trump against the Northern Oblasts?
Uh-huh.
What is happening? Why is it happening? And what is your analysis? Because I really don't pay attention to it much because I have white privilege.
Well, why it's happening is, I think, a very good question, and I've never heard a remotely persuasive answer for why it's happening. Donald Trump himself has given, I think, no fewer than like a dozen different justifications at some point as to why it's necessary to wage economic warfare against Canada. It really, I mean, I'm sure even you can agree that this very much came out of left field, right? As much as Trump has spoken about tariffs in the past, I think that the understanding has always been that this is mostly a sort of Chinese sort of centric policy. And the idea that Canada is sort of like one of the great enemies of America that needs to be brought to heel through economic warfare feels like just very sudden, very abrupt. It doesn't feel like it came out of any identifiable corner of MAGA. It doesn't feel like it came out of any identifiable corner of sort of American sort of rightist thought in general. So, and this has been very difficult for the Canadians as well, because it means that it's very hard to know exactly how to appease Trump out of this fixation, right? The fact that he keeps insisting that the tariffs are coming, that they're going to be swift and cruel and vindictive and sweeping. And
what does he say? Does he say what the concessions are that he wants? Because originally it was stop sending heroin through our border, which I think was
fentanyl, right? That's what I mean. Like, because I have this? I was talking about this on a podcast recently. Was this my little notepad where I had it? I think it was somewhere else.
Joe Rogan of the left keeps his notes, and so he can get out. He can do his. We're giving you time to air your stump speech right now on tariffs.
Okay, well,
go ahead.
From what I have been able to record. At different times, he has suggested that it is about fentanyl, it is about illegal immigration, it is about Canada sort of like taking advantage of America in some unspecified way. It's about the fact that there's a trade deficit with Canada, which Trump does not understand, but thinks is a sort of sign of another country sort of scamming America, as opposed to just that other country having a lot of things that Americans want to buy. He has suggested it's because Canada is, quote unquote, not a real country and should be the 51st state. He's suggested, there's a faction of the administration that seems to imply that this is part of some long game to get rid of the income tax and just replace it entirely with tariffs. He's at various times suggested that this is a way to sort of get Canadian businesses to locate in the US instead of staying in Canada. And then, there's times in which he's just sort of implied that tariffs are just kind of a good unto themselves, and he just likes them because he likes them, and that he doesn't need to justify them for any reason beyond that. And, all of this basically flies in the face of any sort of economic rationale, and it's been bad for the markets, as we've seen. It would certainly be bad for the American consumer, just given how intertwined our two economies are in terms of the shipping of consumer goods and raw materials. And it doesn't sort of seem like anybody in his administration is particularly eager, except for Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, particularly eager to sort of play defense for this. And I feel, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, you're more plugged into this sort of scene than I am. It doesn't really feel like anybody in sort of the right-wing kind of influencer world is very eager to play defense for tariffs either. Because I think that when most people sort of thought, like, well, what is the attractive qualities of Trump or the promise of Trump? They think cracking down on immigration, maybe they think Doge, maybe they think going after woke and some of these sorts of things. I really do not think tariffing Canada was on anybody's list of priorities.
Yeah, I did think it is a testament to Donald Trump's ferocity as a politician that he levied the tariffs originally to get Justin Trudeau to make concessions about like border security, which, correct me if I'm wrong, had already been agreed to under Biden, right?
Yeah.
So so it was like Trump basically just taking credit. Now I'm laughing in like an evil Joker way because I think it just it's cynical and it shows how this is a democracy, JJ, and the uninformed voter is as much of a voter as you and I, and apparently that's a sacred, wonderful thing we have. But I made a video called the MAGA ideological empire is going to collapse, which I should have clarified. Not necessarily anytime immediately soon, but certainly over the next couple of years. Because I do, contrary to what many people on the left think, there are intelligent, principled people who support Donald Trump. And I think you're right, actually, that none of them, or at least none of my sampling of the right-wing sphere, I don't know, gives two shits about the tariffs. I saw Jordan Peterson was giving airtime to someone who was like laying it all out, a Canadian laying it out against Trump, and obviously Jordan is very pro-Trump because his employer.
Yes.
Jordan has gone down that path of much of his own accord for sure. But I don't understand them. I do think, and if I was a more well-researched person and cared about convincing people, I would have cited the specific example of Trump, and maybe you even know this, where he has announced tariffs on a country, and then the next day the country does actually cave in a much more substantial way than Trudeau agreeing to the things that had already been agreed upon. I think there were some South American countries where that was the case.
Yeah, I think it was Colombia.
Yeah. So the argument it's a negotiating strategy is a real thing. I mean, it at least in principle has merit. Yeah. But I don't know what he's like. What has he said? Like has he said? Has he given a condition? Has he said, I will lift the tariffs when X happens?
No, he hasn't done that. Well, I mean, the closest he did was when, the fentanyl thing, right? But what is, I think, understood now is that the fentanyl thing was just a pretext, because in order to sort of evoke the emergency powers that give the president the right to just impose tariffs willy-nilly without Congress, the president has to make the case that America is facing some sort of, imminent threat. And so when he signed the executive order, he sort of said the imminent threat was fentanyl. And, former Prime Minister Trudeau went out of his way to appease those concerns. He appointed a fentanyl czar. He, affirmed, the deal that they had struck with Biden in terms of border security. But, Trudeau did some sort of ostentatious things where, he dispatched Mounties to the border to, beef things up and that kind of thing. And already no fentanyl is really exported from Canada to the US. It's something like less than 0.5% or something ridiculous like that. So it's like, and Trump gave Trudeau a month to sort of work this out. And then Trudeau had some sort of phone call with Trump, and apparently it went very badly because Trump and Vance and some of the other folks that were on the call were just kind of like, well, we don't really believe you, or you can cite all of these numbers you want, Mr. Prime Minister, but, we're not convinced. And then Trudeau gave what I thought was actually quite a good speech the day after, in which he was visibly just kind of exhausted and fed up. And he's just like, I don't know what I can do. I'm doing what he's asking me to do. It doesn't seem to matter one whit. So, here we are. And right now, as we film this, we're in another sort of limbo period because we got another extension a second time. Supposedly the tariffs are going to be reimposed on, April 2nd, I think. And the new prime minister, the new government has no deeper clue. And so I think what you're seeing now in Canada is there's just kind of a resignation. There's just kind of a sense that Canada can't really do anything in response to this sort of mercurial man's with a rather loose grasp on reality. So at the very least, all the Canadians can do is just kind of hunker down and hope to weather this particular storm, and we're having an election in Canada right now, as I'm sure you know, and this is one of the big defining issues of the campaign is basically, do the Liberals or the Conservatives have the better strategy to weather the Trump storm? Whether that means expanding our trade partners with non-American countries or, more trade within Canada, more economic growth in other ways, right? This is the issue now that is going to define Canadian politics for the near future.
My hunch is that I suspect all of this is prelude to annexation.
And how's that gonna play out?
Are you prepared? What
does annexation mean?
Hold on. I'm asking you. I'm asking you. What percent serious do you think, Donald? Greenland, I absolutely believe, and I'd be like, fuck it, let's buy Greenland. Why not? Canada, it's gotta be rhetoric. I don't think he seriously thinks that would happen in his.
Well, I don't know. He brings it up so often, right? It's because this was the thing, and I actually made a whole video kind of discussing this in passive sort of way, right? When he brought it up once in a while as kind of just kind of a weird musing, it was one thing, and you could kind of engage with it as just kind of a thought exercise. But now Trump brings it up so incessantly. Like he brought it up like for something like 4 minutes straight in his recent Fox interview with Laura Ingraham, right? Like he's just very fixated on this idea, like Canada should be the 51st state. And it's just, but it's he's like insistent, and yet there's actually like nothing resembling a strategy to make that happen.
Yeah, and also
right?
I don't know who supports this in this quote unquote MAGA base of like because the classic MAGA perspective is, which is arguably to some degree true, is like Canada's a very liberal ass country.
Yes.
Why do we want it? We're going to bring a new state in and give them 2 senators, and which gives an advantage to the
dozens
the
of members of the House of Representatives and dozens of votes in the Electoral College, right? Like there's no partisan reason for this. You know, the Canadians don't want it, the Americans don't want it, the Republicans don't want it. And so this is what I mean when it really sort of starts to become an example of just the degree that Trump is kind of losing his mind and is just saying ridiculous things. And then we're like, you know, okay, grandma, time for bed. You know, that scene, right? But it's troubling, right? Because like if Trump is like this deranged, like this demonstrably wrong and incoherent on this, it's like it really sort of exposes the lie that he's some sort of great deal maker or some sort of master tactician, or that, you know, he's clever like a fox, because there is no cleverness to this. Like there's nothing that Canada can offer America that it's not already offering. There is no path to annexation that Trump has laid out in anything resembling kind of coherent terms. No effort to get the kind of buy-in, frankly, that you would need from Canadians in order to make something like this happen. And so, like you said, no support from any corners of the Republican base. So what can you conclude other than Trump is just kind of nuts?
It's to trigger libs like you to go on 2.5-minute rants like you just did. Got him, baited, clipped, chimped. This actually leads into a phenomenal discussion point between you and I, JJ.
All right.
As you may or may not know, I often ask my audience, what would you like to see the indomitable JJ McCullough and I discuss in one of our lively rounds of banter? And at Bilecraft, Big Hill Raft said, JJ has several times said that he regards Bernie Sanders as almost much of a populist as Donald Trump. As I know you like Bernie, referring to me, and apparently his rallies are getting record attendance, I'd be interested in hearing a discussion of this and maybe a broad strategy about the American left, and then something about Ukraine, which I will pay no attention to. Bernie Sanders, I'm on record. I'm on the record. Right? The media was in a storm when I said this, but I said, as I'm on the record, I would have gladly voted for Bernie Sanders over Donald Trump, which is true. And people, you know, they like to...
Yeah, I saw your interview with our buddy Soy Pill about this. Where,
your buddy Soy Pill. Yeah, who regards you as a harmful racist because you're platforming me, who platformed a harmful racist and by associated property.
I can't keep track of all of the harmful things that I'm indirectly platforming, Paul.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's fair. At a certain point, it's almost like we shouldn't take that seriously. But anyway, Bernie Sanders. Why do you... You said he's almost as much a populist, which he is a populist. He's a left-wing populist.
Yeah.
And I would have liked Bernie Sanders because I think he would have probably been the best person to reduce the military-industrial complex, or at least take on the military-industrial complex.
What do you? But see, like the thing, this is what I remember finding annoying about your conversation with Soy Pill, is that your understanding of Bernie Sanders is based on this kind of like mythical, imaginary version of him that you have in your head, as opposed to a version of him that is informed by, say, the things that he supports in the Senate, or the politicians that he endorses, and all this kind of thing. Like, for example, like, you know, he endorsed Kamala Harris in the last election. Like Bernie Sanders.
That's meaningless. He endorsed, what's his name? Joe Biden after they kneecapped him at the beginning. Or no, wait, that was Hillary, right? In 2016? Well, they kneecapped him both times, didn't they?
Well, no,
yeah,
because they'll,
time. Oh, okay. Yeah, according to, sorry.
No, but the point is, Paul, is that if you actually care about Bernie Sanders, presumably you would pay some heed to his advice on who to vote for. And if you find... No, listen
not when
to
it's
this, Paul,
conditioned by
pure
politics.
If you find the question of who is better, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, and if you also say, I like Bernie Sanders, then shouldn't Bernie Sanders' opinion on who is better in that matchup matter somewhat to you? No. Particularly when Bernie Sanders would presumably be a vote of support for one of those candidates' agendas and a vote of opposition to the other candidate's agenda.
One of the, I would think, fairest, one of the criticisms of Bernie Sanders that I agree with is that when he did get kneecapped by the establishment Democrats,
The voters, you mean?
he just
The
fell in
voters who
line.
didn't vote for him?
The 580 superdelegates or whatever. He just fell in line and didn't say anything about it. He said, "Oh, I'm a good party politician." And, fair enough, cynical. We live in a democracy under a two-party system. If you want to do anything, you need to abide by the two-party system. Fine. Even AOC goes along with that. But
Yes.
I think it is fair enough. Once again, as a representative of the everyman, right, I have no problem shouting my uninformed opinions from the rooftops, acknowledging that they are, in fact, uninformed, right? Because I think it's important to give people an insight as to what kooks like me think about things. But I do think, at least judging by Bernie Sanders' rhetoric and judging by supporters of him who I regard as intelligent and trustworthy, he would be one of the most likely candidates to cut military spending. Is that a fair? Am I correct in that assessment?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think Bernie Sanders would. I mean, I think though that any of your bog standard Democrats would be more likely to do that than the Republican they're running against in any election ever.
Sure,
so, I mean,
maybe. No, but here's the flip. Republicans, well, no, there isn't a flip. I mean, like, I can't. Trump sucks. Okay, nobody hates Republicans more than I do. Okay,
maybe I do.
Fat chance. So it's like there was no presidential candidate who would address the deficit, which I think is one of the it's one of the main issues. I think the border was arguably one of the most significant national security issues. I do think Donald Trump would be more hawkish on the border.
Yes, and Bernie Sanders would not be as hawkish.
I think Bernie Sanders would be, because Bernie Sanders.
What has Bernie? Who has look at the legislation?
Listen to Bernie Sanders' interview with Ezra Klein from 8-10 years ago.
We're not living 8 or 10 years ago. Look at the things that.
There's no evidence that his position has changed.
Look at the things that he's voted for or against that have come before him in the United States Senate. He voted for the immigration compromise bill that Trump famously opposed and instructed all of the Republicans to torpedo.
Sure.
So that's a pretty clear glimpse into what he supports.
Correct. But I'm saying Bernie, and I don't know, this is a betting game and it's a counterfactual because it's never going to happen. But compared to Kamala, I think Bernie is more, I do think he's more populist. And I think as a populist, as he has explicitly stated, lots of illegal immigration, especially if it's economic migration, is bad for the working class. Now, people say, well, there's studies that say otherwise, and it's like, okay, there's studies that say minimum wage is a terrible thing. There's studies that say minimum wage is a great thing. The economy is, I think you do have to defer to understandings of mechanisms more so than studies, because it's like, how do those studies? The economy is the most complex thing. It's literally the sum total of all human activity, essentially, in a region. You're not going to be able to just do a study and say, well, the study proves it. But, we can say things like, well, if we raise taxes to 100%, that's probably a bad idea. And if we kill minimum wage entirely, I used to be I'm okay with getting rid of the minimum wage. And now I'm kind of like, if you can't pay someone $15 an hour, I kind of do agree with the whole, maybe you shouldn't be in business, in this day and age, but I don't know. I don't know. I'm not ideological on that. Point is, I want to get into a broader topic here, JJ, because this is the fundamental, this is the populist, the central axiom of populism, right or left, and that is opposition to the neoliberal status quo.
Is that so?
How do you feel when I say that phrase? The neoliberal status quo. Not thoughts. What feelings are evoked by that?
Neoliberal is one of the most sort of useless terms that I think is thrown around a lot, and is often to me a sort of suggestion that the person who's speaking doesn't really know what he's talking about, and is just trying to sort of evoke a kind of cheap fear from his audience by sort of citing the name. It's very similar to how when I was your age, the phrase of du jour was neoconservative, and everything was neoconservative.
No, listen, nobody hates neoconservatives more than I do.
Well, yes.
But nobody hates neoliberals more than I do.
And so like these are just like they're terms that kind of are supposed to evoke the idea of some sort of like sinister conspiracy afoot, some sort of sinister ideology that has somehow permeated the ruling class and is responsible for all of the
Yeah, it's like
sort of
Project
wicked things.
2025. It's like a, vague
No, but
general.
Project 2025,
I
Project
know it's a terrible
2025,
comparison. Project 2025 is a manifesto. There's no neoliberal manifesto.
it's a thing that you can pick up and
Yeah,
it
I know, I
says
know. That was a
Project
terrible.
2025 on
I'm
it.
editing that out. I didn't say that.
No, no, no.
No.
It's
Keep
like,
it in.
the thing
Save
about
the L's.
The thing about the neoliberals is that like nobody identifies as a neoliberal. Like there was never any time in which like neoliberalism as a philosophy was actively championed. It's just kind of like an after the fact label.
Yeah,
that
it's a
certain
descriptor.
Sort. But I mean, like, what is it though?
It
Like,
it broadly refers to the economic philosophy that intellectually goes back. It's basically libertarian economics. It goes back to it's got roots in Hayek and all that libertarian shit. But then it really came to fruition under Bill Clinton. And excuse me, just to be clear, I'm repeating the talking points of Joshua Citarella, the Joe Rogan of the left, or the Joe Rogan of the American left. You're the Joe Rogan of the Canadian left.
I know
Joshua
that's why we're
Citarella.
such good buddies, Joshua.
Yeah, right. But surely,
I like clash with Joshua on this topic, right? And in fact, I specifically had a podcast hosted by JREG.
Yeah, which I'm surprised that you
it.
were allowed or you were okay with them airing that because it was the most. I'm surprised that you're still in journalism now. After that, it was like Persia at Thermopylae. Truly a historic defeat.
It was a good-natured conversation, Paul. It wasn't it wasn't an argument. But the point is that like neoliberal is now often used, particularly by sort of folks on the further left, to kind of just describe any agenda towards government management of the economy that includes things such as privatization, deregulation, tax cuts, and just
free market economics. It's the idea. Yeah.
But I mean, like that's always been the business of America.
Okay,
right?
but all right. So fair enough.
Right?
But hold on. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. It's this would be my. I'm happy to adopt. I have my minors in gender studies. They talked about neoliberal.
I know.
Capitalism all the time, and I
surprise me.
Yeah, and I mean, literally, I was conditioned to hear that, and it's like if I hear someone call someone a snowflake, I'm like, all the kids these days are snowflakes. I'm like, okay, I automatically am just gonna filter everything that person says now through this is like some crank grandma, right?
Yes.
And the neoliberal thing, same thing, except blue-haired social justice warrior. And now I have matured and wizened, and yes, neoliberalism is a broad, vague term, but that's general terms are useful for describing general phenomenon, and the general phenomenon that like GDP per capita is a good measure of something that we should be trying to improve, right? And it's like, well, obviously up to a certain point, GDP per capita is good, and like providing for people's material goods. But like it is an open question to the degree that we put like why. Did you see DoorDash is allowing people to order food on an interest plan now, or not on an interest plan, on a deferred payment
an installment on install payments
yes.
for your burger.
DoorDash partnered with Klarna, and I don't know what Klarna does. I suspect they're financial technology.
Yes.
You can now pay for your fucking DoorDash in installments, and you can end up in debt to DoorDash. Okay, that's disgusting. I'm sorry, it's sickening. And that's like, it's like, well, but this is, but according to the math, that's economic innovation. Like, oh, we're able to get people their microplastic infused slop easier, so they don't have to get off their ass. And it's like, you can extend this to, okay, we have a new smartphone every year. Everyone is getting a new they're getting the coolest smartphone every year. Therefore, GDP's rising. It's like, and people are, all of the metrics of well-being, actual well-being, are decreasing. People are more lonely. People are more self-deleting and all that stuff, and using drugs, and
that's the fault of DoorDash. I'm just trying to follow the.
It's the fault of. It's many things. It's unintentional. It's a result of the technology. So to label it, to do a univariate analysis here would be foolish, as any social scientist worth his salt knows. But the reigning ideology that people should be free to make their choices. Who are you to say that someone shouldn't have the freedom to go into debt to buy DoorDash? because it's freedom. It's freedom. It's freedom. It's freedom. It's freedom.
Yes.
It's liberal. That's what liberal. The root word
It
of
is
liberal is
freedom, yes.
Yeah, liberty. Fuck that.
Okay,
That's
but I mean,
ridiculous. The question, who are you to tell someone else what to do, is answered by, if that person is going into debt to pay for DoorDash, they have forfeited their right to use DoorDash at that point.
yeah, but I mean, like, there's nothing.
Same thing with credit cards that have 25% interest rates. It's like, if you are sitting on thousands of dollars of credit card debt because you bought shoes and shit, it's like, well, who the argument is, well, you can't tell them what to do because they're economic rational actors, know what's best for them. It's like, we know that's complete bullshit. We know that human beings are not rational economic actors. And so we need some level of what has been termed systemic rationality. We need the system to bias people in favor of making what are objectively, by any standard, rational decisions, right? So like making heroin illegal so people don't use heroin. Yes. That's the system biasing people to make the rational decision, because once you become a heroin addict, you're no longer in a position to be making rational decisions. And I would say, in our dopamine-addled world, with all this rampant consumerism, we need government restrictions on what people can do. And if I were United States, if I were president, if I were the Great White Hope, Donald J. Trump, right now, instead of launching this deeply unpatriotic war against our northern neighbors, I would write an executive order right now that says, under no circumstances are you allowed to pay installments of food delivery. I would write an executive order that just says that. Yeah. And then I would just stamp out, and then everyone would agree. Everyone would go, yep, you know what? Don't even care on this one. That's correct. And eventually we move towards a point where we're not fetishizing the free choice of rational economic actors. What do you have to say to all of that, JJ?
Well, Paul, I think that you're like maybe extrapolating a little too grandly from a relatively limited anecdote. The fact is that America has a democratic government. It has many regulatory agencies, or at least it did before Doge, destroyed them all. But, there's nothing unusual or unexpected about the Congress passing laws to regulate public health or public safety or the public interest,
Great.
What is it? To protect the general welfare, as it says in the Constitution. I mean, that's how government works. There's all sorts of laws that regulate, all sorts of activities in the name of the greater good. And so, there's nothing.
All right. So hold on. So let me ask you this. If Trump came out tomorrow and said, for example, you can't buy soda using food stamps.
Yeah.
Would you support that? Would you say that's probably a good idea overall?
Oh, it sort of depend, I guess, how it was rationalized. If Trump did it, it would probably just be justified by cruelty.
Well, it depends on who's doing it, independent of what the actual policy is. If I don't like the guy, then I'm going to disagree with it.
If the guy is sort of malevolently motivated, as I think much of what Trump does is, then I think it's worthy to be more skeptical of it than it would be done.
Okay, fine. I'm asking you, forget, this is one of those experiments where we reverse which politician.
Yeah, but just sure. Like, if people were sort of like modifying food stamps in the name of sort of greater public health, I think that would probably be rational. I mean, you do kind of get into a bit of a sort of nanny state busybodying in a way that is sort of very paternalistic towards people who are already,
some
poor,
level of
right?
Yes, who are using government-funded food stamps.
So like that, I mean, I don't know exactly how I feel about this issue, but there's certainly like a case that can be made on the other side as well, in the same way that we should be incentivizing poor people to have healthy diets. There's people that would sort of say, well, poor people have agencies. I just got back from the burger place on the corner here, Paul, and I had a big milkshake because I've had a busy day, and I feel like I'm allowed to have milkshakes when I want to have something nice for myself. I mean, so you could sort of say like, well, can't the poor occasionally have something that's maybe a little unhealthy as a special treat,
Sure, but if you're using someone else's money, if I loaned you money, said, you're like, Paul, I'm poor. My after I was destroyed by Joshua Citarella in the debate about neoliberalism, my career's over. I have no money. Can you please lend me some money to buy food? And then you go out and buy a bunch of fucking milkshakes. I'd be like, fuck you. So let's get this. All right, hold on. All right, we're gonna do a real time. We're gonna do real time. All right, we're gonna do this just. All right. The bill. It's whatever time it is. It's 6 p.m. Pacific time. I'm the lobbyist. I just slid the 10,000-page omnibus bill on your desk and said, this is to stop people from using food stamps to pay for sugar. You have 2 hours to decide. No, you have right now to decide, like it is in real life, where you don't read it. You just have to decide, yes or no, are you voting to ban food stamps paying for soda, or are you allowing food stamps to be used for soda and Twinkies and?
I would probably, if I was a politician, I'd probably veto that bill and sort of posture very righteously about it and sort of say, like, at a time when, the nation is facing so many much more critical problems, the idea that the Congress is wasting their time going after those who already have the least among us, I think is a gross, misprioritization of the nation's, attention and blah, 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 blah. Because, I mean, I do think, like, maybe if it was, like, bundled as part of some, like, larger health initiative bill, but I don't support the kind of, like, vindictive just going after people for the sake of sort of scoring cheap political points. Because ultimately, like, this is not.
Okay.
No,
Well, first off, let me just say,
yeah,
the reason, JJ, that I admire you so much is of how true is that I know no matter what, you're not lying. Okay, because I absolutely believe you would. What did you say? You're like, I'd probably grandstand about how this is. It's like, of course, that's brilliant political maneuvering.
Yes.
I mean, not that I would do. I mean, I would attack you for it as an influencer pursuing truth and calling it out.
I'll say this. I'll say this to you, Paul. Like, what you have done a good job of making me sort of think about in this context is just how, in the current political moment where everything is politicized, everything is polarized, everything is a culture war, it does become difficult to think just in a purely objective terms about public policy. You think so much instead about like how things would be perceived, what sort of narratives they feed into, what kind of like wins they give for one ideological tribe or another in the realm of sort of rhetoric and all of this. What sort of concessions are you being perceived as making?
Sure.
And that's probably not good. And that's one of the, I think, the negative consequences of having an overly sort of polarized, ideologically divided society is that the politician loses his capacity to sort of see things for what they are. And, but the only way you can kind of get away from that is you just kind of have to have a sort of cultural change in which sort of politics becomes a much less sort of heated thing, and that you have more good faith conversations between politicians of rival parties. And, you kind of begin from a point of agreement and then you kind of work down from there, as opposed to just kind of like blasting something out there and saying, if you don't support this, you're a hypocrite, or you support X, Y, and Z. Right, because that puts people on the defensive, right? As I feel on the defensive because of the way that you've sort of thrown this at me. Whereas if we had started in a conciliatory place and sort of thought, well, what is the big picture here that we're trying to get to?
Yes, this is a wise insight, JJ. But also notice that even though you initially felt defensive, you did just say, hey, I should point out, though, that, I do need to think about this. And you gave me good grace because we have a reciprocal relationship. And so it is the case that perhaps among the highest priorities of our political discourse is for people who disagree greatly to speak to one another.
I think it goes beyond speaking, though, because I think that working together
I agree.
Ultimately matters, right? And I think that when we talk about, particularly when we talk about Congress, right, like it's Congress these days, because things are so polarized, it's much less of the work is being done at sort of the committee level. Like the committee level used to be where sort of the partisans of both sides come together and actually work to construct meaningful legislation that then can be passed in a sort of bipartisan way. But instead now you have everything being done party line. The committees are voting on party line, which then goes to the Congress, which is party line, which is then, supported by a president on a party line basis. And it's happening that way because, once the committees sort of stop working together in a sort of collaborative way, the other party doesn't feel any sort of sense of ownership of this legislation, right? This is legislation that's being made by one half of the political spectrum and then is sort of being given to the other half and sort of saying, take it or leave it. And if you leave it, we're going to judge you and demagogue against you in all sorts of sort of terrible ways. That's why it was so bad when Trump came out against the bipartisan border legislation, because that seemed like it was a good faith effort to kind of give both sides half a loaf and address the concerns of the American public that as it related to the border. And the legislation was sort of crafted from the position of beginning with the conclusion and working down from there. And the conclusion is, something has to be done.
I believe we've discussed this before. And I could only repeat what the Republicans said about the Republicans who voted against that bill. It was a bipartisan bill. It was proposed by proposed by a Republican or authored by a Republican. The bill codified catch and release, which was the reason for. Well, when you're done typing, I can.
Hold on. How did you know I was typing?
Because you're not slick, JJ. How'd I know he was typing? Because you're going like this. I'm going. Hold on one sec.
Sorry, go on.
Are you done?
You can see my hands, Paul.
I'm gonna ban you. You're not allowed to use your. Are you even Mac?
Yeah.
Yeah. No text. I'm gonna. I'm gonna. Never mind.
Go on.
The border bill.
Yes. It was bad in some ways. What kind of the
People
conclusion you're
say
getting
it
to?
was bad, and I don't trust you enough to have investigated why they said it was bad enough to represent it properly.
But the thing is, people were not saying it was bad, right? Trump said it was bad
Ted Cruz said it
because
was bad, and all the Republicans who voted against it said it was bad because it
well, they did so
codified catch
after the Trump.
and
They did so
release.
after Trump came out and was opposed to it, and then they had
Okay.
to come up with some sort of rationalization
Point
to
is,
dislike it.
okay, in theory, yes, there should be more. I would, in classic me fashion, like to bring it back to me.
Of
Because the
course.
show is ultimately about me. I am the center of gravity. I'm increasingly realizing my role is the Klaus Schwab of online politics, to manipulate things from behind the scene and form a coalition of freaks and cranks like me, you, FD Signifier, and Andrew Wilson and Nick Fuentes. How would you feel if I had a conversation with Nick Fuentes that was as cordial as my conversations with Destiny?
I would not be in favor of it. I mean, I don't think Nick Fuentes needs, deserves, or has earned any more publicity than he already has.
Would would you be? Would you think that it was worse than talking to Destiny?
Yes, I would think it was worse than talking to Destiny. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you know what out of curiosity, what is the worst thing that Nick Fuentes has ever said that you're aware of?
Well, Nick Fuentes is a Holocaust denier, right?
Okay,
So I think
that's up there. Yeah.
that's not great. I mean, as
Okay.
far as I'm
Destiny
concerned.
said he was glad that a father was killed and
Yeah,
shot.
yeah, and I
Which
think
of
that
those is
that
worse
well,
morally?
I think that Holocaust denial is something that I definitely do not want to see mainstreamed, and I think that we are at a heightened risk of that kind of Nazi apologia going mainstream. And so I feel like, as far as sort of odious beliefs that have a potential to sort of metastasize, I would sort of say that neo-Nazism is the greater threat, as opposed to apologizing or making excuses for people getting shot at Trump rallies, which I agree was a bad thing. I stood up against it. I actually canceled an opportunity to go back on Destiny's show
Yeah.
exactly in response
Which,
to that.
yeah, I think
So
that's fair. So, all right, well,
my problem with you, Paul, is that I have no faith that if you were to go on Nick Fuentes' show, that you would display even as much combativeness to him as you do in a typical encounter with
really.
me. I don't. I
Oh
think
well,
I
yeah,
think
because I haven't met him before. I can call you a fucking goonhead and whatever because we've talked before.
yeah.
And
But I mean, but
you
you're aware of
absolutely
what
roast
Nick.
me over text, by the way. So this is just me getting my public justice back.
You're aware of what Nick Fuentes is all about, though.
Sure.
And I think that, like, if your instinct in an encounter with him is to not be irritable towards him,
You don't.
and to
Okay.
attempt,
All right. Hold on. Let me just stop you right there because
yeah,
what I would absolutely discuss with him
uh-huh,
is, hey, Nick, you know how you hate Israel? Well, hey, me too, man. Me too. Like, there's a lot of
yeah,
reasons to hate
yeah.
Israel right about now in history.
Yeah, yeah.
You
You
know.
tried to find that kind of common ground in the
Yeah,
same way
yeah.
that you
So here's
tried
my
to
question.
find.
Here's my question,
Yeah.
Nick. Dave Smith is Jewish. Norman Finkelstein is Jewish.
Hmm.
Ian Pape is Jewish. These are some of the most ardent, vocal, effective critics of Israel. Why don't you, or why do you obsess about Jewishness rather than the Zionist part? And
Uh-huh.
and why are you repeating Ben Shapiro talking points? That, well, actually, when you criticize Zionism, you're really criticizing Jews. It's like, that's what Ben Shapiro says. And then really what Nick Fuentes is saying, well, actually, you shouldn't say Zionists, you should just say the Jews. It's like, oh, interesting. If Ben Shapiro and Nick Fuentes are saying the same thing, that's at minimum interesting and lends credence to Tucker Carlson's theory that Nick Fuentes is a Fed working for Israel, trying to advance their agenda. That would be one thing. The other thing, too, would be
Okay.
why he hates Wife Jack so much, which is potentially the cringiest fucking thing, and how it's literally just unabashed hating women. It's not even about like pushing back against degeneracy anymore, because the antidote to like sexual degeneracy, whatever that means in your mind, is not hating women. It's upholding like normal monogamy. Like, yeah, this is my wife and I love her, and she's kind of silly, but ultimately a man loves and respects his wife. It's like that should be the norm. And the Wife Jack meme, for a variety of complex applied sociological reasons, pushed that, and he called it gay. And I would
Hmm.
probably only argue with him. Well, I'd be kind for the first 30, 40 minutes like I was with Destiny. Just to bait him. And then I would destroy him on wife check.
Okay. Well, I'm not convinced that the biggest problem with Nick Fuentes is that his opposition to the state of Israel is not quite principled enough for your tastes. I think that there's problems with
You
him
know
that
what,
go far
JJ?
beyond that,
That's fine.
or that his position on women is maybe I mean, I don't know. These
Yeah,
just strike me as issues of somewhat low salience in terms of the Nick Fuentes oeuvre of terrible takes.
that's fair. Well, when a you won't get this reference, JJ, but when a Malphite top player is explaining to the Vayne 80 carry why building tank items is better, Malphite must realize that Vayne, by virtue of who she is, cannot and perhaps should not understand what he's saying because they are cut from two different slabs of rock, so to speak. You want to send that text? You go ahead.
I was just joshing. Are you
Um,
vain, Paul?
no, I'm Malphite in this equation. I played 80 carry maybe 15 times out of my
You're
7 years
sometimes
playing
a
League of
little vain,
Legends.
though.
That might be the worst joke you've ever made in your
I was
time.
only half listening to what you were
Oh
saying.
wait, okay, all right. This is great. Let me ask you this, JJ.
Yes.
We'll discuss your propaganda piece that you released here on a very
Mm,
interesting issue, which
mm,
is a question of what is an American, JJ. I'm
mm,
fascinated by this issue. In particular, I'm
yeah.
interested in the question, what is a white American? Right?
Mm.
Because first off, nobody loves white Americans more than I do.
Of
Right?
course, some of your best friends are white
So,
Americans, from what I understand.
that's true. Um, Although I'll be honest, I met a lot of assholes in my life, and most of them were white American.
Yeah,
They're just so loud and annoying sometimes. But anyway,
yeah.
what is a white American, JJ? Because I have been told that white is not a culture; it's
Mm.
essentially racism incarnate, according
Hmm.
to FT Signifier, and many people
Uh-huh.
believe that.
Did that come up in your chat with him?
It did. It did. We talked for like 40 minutes about what is an American, and he
Oh
didn't really
my.
have any answers. He was like, "Well, racism." I'm like, okay, that's not
Yeah.
very, it's not a very useful thing. And I do think there is something to be said about, okay, well, I'm not a European American, really. I'm from, my ancestors are from Europe, but I have no
Yeah.
connection to Ireland or Poland or any of that.
Yeah. You
And
do have some connection to it. You have a genetic connection, right?
sure, but I have no cultural, spiritual. I don't feel like if Poland got invaded, it'd be like tough shit.
Yeah.
Um, and certainly if it became to prioritizing Poland's interests or America's interests, I'd
Yeah.
prioritize America's
Yeah.
interests. But
Yeah.
anyway, you had I sent you that article, and you had sent me some other article by some other apparently mainstream person who, just because he doesn't
Let me
say.
let me let me let me set let me set this up, Paul.
Go
I'm
ahead,
doing a
set the
bad job
yeah.
of describing it. No,
Okay,
it's like I wrote
I
an
was really about
article
to go off the
recently.
rails there, by the way, but so good.
I
Yes,
wrote
go
an
ahead.
I wrote an article on my Substack that you found provocative, and the article that I wrote on my Substack was in response to an article that had recently been published in the Federalist, which is a sort of conservative. It used to be a kind of like respectable kind of conservative outlet, but has now become increasingly sort of magnified. And the article was in response to an initiative that the Trump administration has actually recently undertaken, presumably on the advocacy of Elon Musk, which is that America should provide sort of expedited green cards to the Afrikaners, who are a sort of community of whites in the nation of South Africa. And in this article, the guy was sort of being like, yes, brilliant move, Mr. Trump, sir. The Afrikaners will be natural Americans. They'll fit in just fine. And, it's not because they're white. Oh, perish the thought. It's because, the Afrikaner culture will somehow fit in naturally into the American culture. And in my article, I thought I argued quite well that anybody who knows anything about Afrikaners would sort of say that there's actually plenty of reason to be skeptical that Afrikaners would fit into American culture if we're going to be judging the desirability of immigrants on the basis of group cultural tendencies as opposed to their individual merit as human beings. And so I think that the idea that the Afrikaners should be given, priority access to move into America only can make sense according to a sort of like racialist supremacist kind of theory of the case.
Yeah, I don't know anything about Afrikaners other than they sound like Australians with a like half British accent as well. I don't know.
Yeah.
But if I recall correctly, you made a broader point about how America is clearly an identity of ideas. The American identity is one based on ideas, not a people group.
Yeah.
And while I am sympathetic to that, because I believe in immigration, I believe in assimilation, it is all. But I think it is. I think we are all making a mistake if we write off the part about it being like an actual people group. Like it is a group of people, and people can assimilate to that people group. But there's a core of that group, and it's definitely not white racial, because Black Americans have been here as long as white people, obviously.
Yes.
And certainly in the South, like Hispanics have been around here. So the idea that it's
and the Native
racial,
Americans as well. Right?
True. Yes, although there's not many of them because we killed a lot of Native Americans. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But point is, American identity is not fundamentally racial. It correlates with race, sure. But the culture, certainly, like Western values are distinct from Chinese value, like the national.
But that's ideas, right? And that's exactly what I'm saying.
True.
Ideas.
Yes, and hence why people can assimilate. But like,
So, and what I'm sort of saying is that if the Afrikaners have no indication of having any sort of cultural history of caring about those values, then we should be able to discriminate against them in the same way that we would discriminate against any other.
Yeah, I don't have a position on the Afrikaners in particular. But
they're a good case study, though, because it's sort of saying, like, this is the whole point, right? Is that I find that whenever people are making the argument that we should have a sort of like cultural centric immigration policy, and that the fitness of immigrants should be based on their cultural compatibility with America, for some reason, I find that this always tends to regress in the direction of like, how can we get more white people into America?
Because Europeans have that culture. It's like last names.
Do they? Like, I mean, like, this is the question,
Western
right?
culture, Western civilization.
I know, but like, it's like, but like the right-wing Republicans have been sort of saying that, Sweden is a socialist hellhole. I mean, God, they say that about Canada.
I don't get. Nobody hates Republicans more than I do. I don't care what they say. But the point about ideas are, I agree. Yes, there's part of it's ideas, but there's also part of it that's like unconscious cultural programming, in terms of like the stories we tell and the references we get. And it's like that's important too.
It is. But nobody outside of America is ever going to be completely fluent in any of that kind of stuff, right? So
well, people in America are obviously fractured in a lot of ways. But like, so it's not a perfect argument. I'm just saying there is something to be said about someone, like if someone came, like, would you support a law that requires U.S. citizens to be able to speak conversational English?
Yeah, we have such a thing in Canada, right? And it's like, I have been involved in immigration.
It's kind of racist of you.
Well, I mean, this is our law in this country, right? I have been involved for a long time in immigration sort of settlement programs in which you sort of teach classes to immigrants to help them sort of learn more about the culture of the country that they're joining. It's something I feel strongly about. Yeah. And I believe strongly in that English is important. And I think that, government should go out of its way to offer English services to immigrants and help them with their English training. We have programs like that in my province of British Columbia. And I think that that's a good thing, right? But what the core of this is a question of immigration, right? So if we are trying to incentivize people to come to this continent, what is the most rational way to do it? Is it the most rational way to do it to, kind of say that we're looking for, entrepreneurs and people that are independent and can sort of self-start and, respect our laws, respect our ideas and sort of fit in? Yep. Or and then judge the individuals on an individual basis and then offer them programs to help them assimilate, blah, 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 blah. Is that the most rational program, the way we've basically been doing it? Or is the more rational program to do kind of what the MAGA crew is advocating for, which is to just make sweeping generalizations about groups of foreigners and in saying any of those foreigners should be given sort of expedited access on the basis of what cultural community they belong to. And I just feel like the Afrikaners, and I feel like that's just dumb, because it's judging people as it's judging people based on the collective that they belong to rather than anything about them as an individual.
Yeah, that's fair. And I'm not even hold on, going back to what you acknowledged earlier about how getting put on the defensive and having to realize it. I'll acknowledge. I'm not disagreeing with you. I believe it is a nation of ideas to some degree. So I'm not disagreeing there. I guess I'm thinking out loud. I'm interested in conversing. I have many right-wing and left-wing cranks follow this channel, but there are some intellectually curious people. And the notion of like classic American philosophical argument. There are historically black colleges that's celebrated. There's Little Italy that's celebrated. There's Koreatown.
Are you jealous of these things, Paul?
I wouldn't say I'm jealous. I guess I'm unsure of. Well, if someone asks like, well, what's your culture, Paul? I'm like, well, I'm an American. It's like, but Little Italy and black culture and Korea, that's part of that. But like,
yeah, well, I
asked FD, do I have as much of a claim to like, like Kendrick Lamar and stuff as like, American descendants of slaves? Well, the argument is no. First off, what does that even mean? That's a broader issue. But like, it's like, I made the point of like, there are American cultural figures that are uniquely American, that the American nationality claims. Like John, not John Lennon, Paul McCartney. Obviously, Americans like him, but he's British or English.
Yeah, but it's still part of American culture, right?
True.
Beatles music is part of American culture.
Yeah, but this is okay. But then it's like, okay, well, is that not cultural appropriation at a certain point? Like,
cultural appropriation is a stupid argument that I have very little time for.
Says the white guy with the Japanese poster behind him and all the multiple artifacts. I agree with you.
No, it's probably maybe my least woke argument, and I've made whole videos about this. Like, cultural appropriation is a dumb concept. I mean, America, Canada, this part of the world, we've always been a melting pot. We make new things out of many different cultural influences, and only recently has that been seen as in any way sort of problematic. But, and so I think there's nothing wrong with enjoying sort of a diverse culture and picking and choosing what parts of, diversity you want to enjoy or what parts you like more than others. And, it's all a matter of taste.
All right. Let me ask you a deeper philosophical question.
Hold on. I want to ask you, say something to you, though, to get to the point that you're trying to get at, right? It's like, if you feel insecure about your identity, right, there's nothing to stop you from
my identity.
You can reconnect with your Polish heritage or your Irish heritage or whatever.
God, that's so cheesy. No, fuck that.
Well, then don't complain about it, Paul, right? Like you can't have it both ways. You can't sort of say like, I want a cultural identity that goes beyond just being a citizen of modern 21st century America, and then also sort of say, but I have no interest in sort of reconnecting with a part of myself that is somehow more old world and traditional.
First off.
Yeah.
Again, I'm discussing this for the sake of intellectual discussion and because this conversation comes up often. I will admit there is not much practical consequence in my life of like, well, am I white? What's my white American culture? But like, it's an interesting discussion to say, okay, well, is it reasonable at this point in 2025 now that the woke mind virus is in receipt, and now that the MAGA mind virus has taken over, to be like, it's probably okay to be like, yeah, I'm happy to be a white American. I think white American culture is it's kind of unique. It's baseball in the cornfields plus New York, random combination. Like New York is obviously a very diverse place. There's like rural white America. There's like suburban white America. The Bo Burnham like. I grew up watching Family Guy. It's like, well, that's not an irrelevant thing. A lot of like, and again, as soon as you say this, like, well, there's exceptions to that, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, yeah, the same thing could be said for black culture. So in theory, there's no such thing as black culture, but like, on the other hand, there obviously is. And so I guess
it's been informed by different experiences.
Really, what I'm asking is, can I loudly proclaim I'm proud to be white and not feel bad about it?
Probably not. I mean, I feel like white.
Do you think I should be able to?
I don't know. It's like what I think it's fine to be like proud to be American, right? Like America and sort of.
No, I'm proud to be. Well, I'm proud to be what, and that's the thing. I was to say, I have no desire to say that because it's like, and I told FD Signifier this. It's like, bro, Jimi Hendrix, or fucking Lamar Jackson, or Kobe Bryant. It's like these are quintessential American figures. Yeah. They're part of my culture.
Yeah.
And so maybe I should be more hostile to the left wing wokies who want to talk about black culture is like this essential thing. It's like maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, I've made like a bazillion videos about American culture at this point, Paul. It's like a very dominant sort of theme of my channel. And whenever I'm making these videos, I'm not usually like thinking about it in sort of racialized terms. I sort of think about
neither do I. But that's because you and I are white though, and that's the argument. We don't have to think about it.
But it's complicated, right? Because obviously, like white people have been the dominant culture in or certainly the dominant sort of authority of power on this continent for a long time. And when we talk about Black culture, that is in part a product of their marginalization and their othering, right? When you aggressively other a group
Yeah.
and sort of exclude them, it's much easier to sort of say that like they have a cultural tradition that is very coherent in a way that maybe like white America does not really have an equally coherent cultural tradition, in part because we were sort of more accommodating of whites of all sorts of different backgrounds. And then so you kind of get this European kind of melting pot of Italians and Scandinavians and English and French and Spanish and Germans and so forth, right? You're creating something sort of new, like white America. Yeah, and it's just like we denied the African Americans a chance to sort of be part of that milieu. And maybe if they had been accepted as sort of equals much earlier on, we wouldn't be as fixated on this question of Black culture. We wouldn't even think in those terms because the Blacks would have already been fully integrated into the broad mainstream American culture, right? In the same way, we don't really, I can go through the list of sort of things that Americans of different European backgrounds have invented. I forget. I think it was like something to do with like donuts or something. The donut making machine was, I think, invented by a guy. Pardon me?
Berliners?
Well, the American style donut with the hole in it was sort of invented. The machine that makes them in the form that we know today was invented by a guy from Russia or possibly from Romania. But anyway, the point is like we don't think of like the donut as like a Russian food because it was sort of like absorbed into the American mainstream by the time that guy came along in sort of the early 20th century, right?
Sure.
And so I think that you can imagine a scenario in which if Black Americans had been integrated, we would have just thought of their cultural contributions in a much more sort of like neutral way.
That's fair.
And I think that would have been better.
Yeah, I think the moral of the story is the woke mind virus is really pathological in this regard.
Well, I mean, it can be a source of division, right? Like it can encourage a sort of gatekeeping of cultural products in a way that I view as antithetical to the American tradition. And so in that sense, that's why it's my least woke opinion.
All right, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Do you think that Ireland should be for the Irish people?
What does that mean?
That they should have an Irish ethno-state and they should be allowed to have an ethno-state.
I'm happy to be living on this continent where we can have conversations of the sort that you and I are having about how to make our wonderful, diverse sort of society work best. And one of the reasons why I'm happy to live on this continent is that
because you don't have to deal with that.
I don't have to deal with it. I don't have to think.
Okay, fine. That's fair. That's fair. I think it's an interesting philosophical conversation about the role of nation states.
But it's like,
I agree with you. In America,
right? Yeah.
Well, the point. I agree with you. In America, I have the idea of a white. It's like it's the dumbest fucking thing in the history of the world. It's. And I almost we shouldn't even breathe life into it.
The point is one of the great aspects of our culture on this continent is that we got away from that stuff, and I think that we should be able to judge the old world. And
I agree. I agree.
Conceptions of things like nationalism.
Yes, I admit I struggle with this because part of me is like, well, it does like if there's no if Ireland becomes mostly non-Irish, then you kind of don't have Irish people, which is a particular genetic lineage. And it's like, okay, we like diversity. We like Japan as an ethno-state. We like Israel as a Jewish ethno-state. And it's like, well, okay, then what? Because, and I've talked to people in Ireland. There's some weird shit going on that is much deeper than just like Conor McGregor getting pissed about immigrants. It's like they are at minimum future President-elect McGregor. They are really fucking things up there and like arresting old like Irish grandmas. And I do have a little bit of my Irish blood in me, and so maybe I should take your advice and become an Irish nationalist and a Polish nationalist at the same time. I find that ridiculous, but it is an interesting philosophical conversation of like, well, what is diversity? It's like, is diversity every country looks like America or New York, where you walk around and everyone is a different race, or is diversity like, well, we have Ireland, we have Italy, we have Japan, we have China, we have Israel, we have Brazil, and it's like, I don't know. It is an interesting philosophical conversation that I very much sympathize with your. I don't have to deal with it. Why are we even talking about it? Because it's a tough question. Because Ireland should be for the Irish. It's like, okay, now I sound like Conor McGregor. Hate black people and stuff. It's like, okay, that's ridiculous. But it is interesting. I think about like, well, we are in an age of disintegrating identities, and we're increasingly
Yes.
isolated as people. And so, if we're gonna view ourselves as a nation, whatever that means, we have to think philosophically and stretch our minds. Okay, what is a nation? What, is Ireland a
Yeah.
nation? Is it
Yeah.
just statehood that confers nationality, or
Well,
what?
Well, I mean, but the other thing that we have to think about as well is that if we are, American exceptionalists, if we believe that this continent is special and that our style of civilization is special
And superior. Our culture is superior, and we
Yeah,
are God's true chosen country. Yes, I believe that.
if you believe in some ways that we have maybe sort of solved some of these problems better than the Europeans have, then there's nothing wrong with sort of saying that the Europeans can learn a thing or two from us, right? America, our civilization has been inspiring to the Europeans for a lot longer than I think the other way around, right? As long as the New World has existed, Europeans have found it inspiring and provocative and challenging and exciting in a way that their countries have not been, right? And I think that certainly in the post-war era, to the degree that the Europeans have thrived, it's in large part by adopting some of our American ideas. And I think that includes concepts of diversity and pluralism and tolerance, and the idea of a more sort of flexible identity of what it means to be French or German or Spanish or British or Irish or whatever. And I think that we have to have a bit of faith in our own system and to not just constantly look back at Europe and be sort of wistful and nostalgic and be like, oh, why can't we be like that? I mean, European nationalism caused 2 hideous world wars that killed millions and millions of people. Like, we haven't had any, until recently, Canada and the US seem to be doing pretty well with each other. So, and there hasn't been any wars between the states in 200 years. So.
True. Yeah, that's fair. I think Channel 5. Are you familiar with Channel 5, Andrew Callahan, Channel 5 News?
Yeah, I think I know of it. I feel like Greg has introduced this to me before.
I think Channel 5 is truly, I'm going to make a video about how it's the ultimate enlightened centrist propaganda network, which is obviously a compliment. But he has stated, he thinks that at the bottom of a lot of this identity crisis is we feel a loss of connection to our national identity. Mm-hmm. And that, this spurs in the conversation about immigration and all that, and what does it mean to be part of a nation state and all that. So, at minimum, it's worth talking about, and it's worth baiting all of the low IQ people into thinking it's more nefarious.
If there's one thing we can say about you, Paul, is that you're a master baiter.
You want me to edit that one out too? That one's not very good.
Please do.
Well, maybe I won't. All right, well, I think that sums up. I think I'll title this stream JJ McCullough and P.F. Jung discuss a white ethno-state or something like that. I think that'll be sufficiently clickbaity.
Yeah, that's fine.
Something American ethno-state. I don't know. Anything you wanted to talk about or ask me about and get my everyman opinion on these days? I know you've had a long day. Yeah.
No, let me just ask you a very sort of standard pundit question.
Please.
So, Trump's been in charge for, what is it, just a little over 2 months now? How would you rate the performance of the administration to date?
2 thumbs down.
2 thumbs down, eh?
Mm-hmm.
And sort of, if you had to sort of like, if I'm coming back from, the world of the past and you're a man from the future, and I sort of say, so how has Trump sort of conducted himself in his first 2 months of his second term? How would you sort of just broadly describe what we've been witnessing?
Wait, what? I said 2 thumbs down. Now, what was the second?
That's what I'm saying. No, I'm just sort of saying, like, imagine that, like, I'm a guy who, has not experienced any of the last 2 months.
Oh, and I'm describing it to someone?
Yeah, and you're telling me, like,
I would say, here's what I'd say. I'd say, you know how I've been bitching about Zog for like 2 years straight now, ever since October 7th? I was correct.
So in the mind of Paul, sort of the defining qualities of the second Trump administration.
Yeah, is U.S. support for ethnic cleansing is probably up there. And I am going to make a video about why that seemingly obscure topic is actually psychologically significant in terms of like our entire understanding of morality. It's like, well, we view nations that participated in ethnic cleansing as like Germany engaged in ethnic cleansing, and we like to think of ourselves as, well, if we were back then, we would have stopped it. Well, clearly that's not the case, because here we are now. So now it forces all of us to confront, well, what, maybe just genocide and all this shit, man, it's just part and parcel of the world. And if there is a genocide somewhere, maybe what am I going to do about it? It's like, oh, I see. Now I see how these things come about.
Well, that's I won't hold it against you. That's a principled opinion if you want to express it. I mean, definitely no. I mean, I guess I shouldn't have belittled you. I mean, obviously, what's going on in the Middle East is extremely serious, and Trump has certainly done nothing to suggest that he's in any way sort of troubled by that situation. In fact, as you know, has given every signal that he's excited by the prospect of it accelerating and by the prospect of a true, comprehensive ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip being something that he finds fun and funny. I mean, you saw him sharing the meme about, turning the Gaza Strip into
Trump. I
Trump,
wanted to throw up. It's truly evil clown. Like, oh, I see. Like, it is almost schizophrenia inducing to be on Twitter, see that video, and then literally scroll down and see dead fucking children in the rubble. It's like, oh, you know what? I kind of really hate the fact that is the reality of the world. And, I'd like to think that trying to change that in my own crankish ways is a worthy endeavor.
But did you sincerely think that there was any chance that a second Trump administration would be different on this? Than
it was a low. Was there a chance? Far less than 50%. If you ask Paul, would you bet that Trump goes harder on Gaza or less hard? How much money? I'd go. I'll put it all on. He goes just as hard, if not harder, than Kamala Harris.
Yes.
However, there were indications that if he's bitched about Benjamin Netanyahu, he's shared memes shitting on Benjamin Netanyahu. He's also shared clips from his Truth Social of very anti-Zionist professors and foreign policy analysts talking about Benjamin Netanyahu. And I was like, maybe, but it's probably just signaling to the anti-Zionist right. To which
I do sometimes wonder that, like, if, like, actually, and this is something I want to write about, is I still think there's a possibility that MAGA in some current form could go full anti-Semite and could go anti-Israel. But I think that what that would have to, and I sort of wonder,
which you recognize are two different things, correct?
I do, but I do think that if they were to come to MAGA, they'd be pretty bound up in the same package. I think that, and I was do you know the YouTube channel Monsieur Z? He's a sort of,
I think I've seen. I can't remember the video, but
he's sort of like a far right kind of social political commentator. But anyway, he made a video about, I think in his mind, sort of optimistically imagining a world in which sort of MAGA divorces itself from support of Israel, and he posited some things that I suppose you can make a case for.
I think it will. I think that is what the trend is pushing towards.
But fair enough. And I think it's not an illegitimate argument at all. I think a lot of it is being held in place by like a couple of factors, one of which is just this complete stranglehold that the evangelical Christians have on the Republican Party and the MAGA movement in particular.
Yes.
But I do also think that, like what you said before, is like Trump's relationships with world leaders is very idiosyncratic and often just based on his ego and all that. Like we saw this with here in Canada, right, where Trump has every reason to be on the side of Pierre Poilievre, the conservative candidate for prime minister.
Shitting on him.
He was shitting on him just because in his mind Pierre said something insufficiently deferential to him in like one interview once, and that makes him dead to him. So you do have to like wonder if Netanyahu really bothered Trump in some way, as you sort of just suggested he did once in the first term. But let's say that if Netanyahu goes away, if he goes in prison or the Hague or something, and then some new Israeli prime minister comes to power, and Trump has a much more dysfunctional relationship with that guy, would that be enough to kind of make Israel an enemy, right? And I think it might be.
Maybe. Never underestimate Zog. They're very powerful. All right. Well,
anyway, it always, as to be expected, Paul, our conversation inevitably turned into your favorite issue by the end of it. So.
Yeah, it must say something about me or the world or both. What was I going to say? I will say though, on other policy, it's too early to tell. with Donald Trump. I don't support the illegal, or excuse me, I don't support deportation. I mean, obviously, you can deport like hardcore criminals. I don't think taking out grandmas is a good idea or moral at all. I don't know what the total encounters are at the border right now, but they're
the same as Biden.
Well, but I believe, if I recall from my Channel 5 reporting, the asylum process has been clamped down on, which is an unfortunate but necessary thing to do, because people have been abusing the fuck out of it, and that's why we have so many. That's why we had people crossing the border and walking straight up to Border Patrol, and then being given a cell phone and a $3,000 Visa gift card, and then said, "Come back for your court date in 7 years." That's unsustainable.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right. Well, as usual, I don't read the comments, and we'll delete all the ones that are critical of me, and those are not logically opposed to each other. But anyway, thank you everyone for watching. Make sure to comment what JJ and I should talk about next time. Godspeed.